Good evening, and welcome on behalf of the New York Society Library. I'm Sarah Holliday, head of events, and I'm just here briefly to say welcome to you and to tonight's distinguished speakers. Kirstin Valdez Quade is the author of the new novel, The Five Wounds, and the short story collection, Night at the Fiestas, winner of the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Prize. She is the recipient of a 5 Under 35 award from the National Book Foundation, the Rome Prize, and the Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Awards, and the New York Times has called her stories legitimate masterpieces. One of our best-selling and best-loved current novelists, Meg Wolitzer, is the author of numerous novels for adults, including The Interestings, The 10-Year Nap, and The Wife, as well as the young adult novel Belshar, and the middle-grade novel The Fingertips of Duncan Dorfman. Among many plaudits, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said that Meg's recent The Female Persuasion is wonderfully dense and wise, a page-turner that succeeds both at character and ideas. It felt true to life. We very much appreciate Meg joining us tonight for this special conversation. Please do pop your questions and comments in the chat on the right of your screen, and the speakers will address them following their conversation. Enjoy the event.
Thank you. Kirstin, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I've been in your mind, in your brain, enjoying it a great deal. So this novel, The Five Wounds, began as a short story, and it was published in the New Yorker. So what was the trajectory from story to novel? All right, let's take that again. You know what? No book event would we once in every book event. So you've just done it, and now we're done with that part.
I got the disaster over with earlier. Well, I'm so excited to be with you here tonight, and just thank you so much. I'm an enormous fan. So the story began as a story, and about a year after it was published, my now editor emailed and asked if I'd ever considered extending it into a novel. And I was working on stories, and my first book was going to be a story collection because that's what I was working on. And I told her, no, absolutely not. I write short stories. And then I went back to writing short stories. And about a year after that, I was looking at some half-formed drafts, and I realized all of a sudden that these pieces of what I thought were short stories all dealt with the exact same family dynamics. I had a unemployed sort of this flawed guy and his relationship with his codependent mother, and his mooching off of her, and then his estranged daughter. And they all had different names. I thought they were different stories, but all of a sudden I thought, oh man, this is Amadeo and Yolanda and Angel. And I thought, maybe I actually have a lot more questions.
Yeah, I did an event once at Ann Patchett's bookstore, and I made a comment on the stage about how every writer maybe had like 2 or 3 arias to sing, and Ann shouted out 1. And I think that may be true, right? We may have something that we're working on again and again in different ways. But before we get too far, you've mentioned these characters who are the central characters in the book. Would you like to read a little bit to give us a little bit of an amuse-bouche, like the free thing you get at a restaurant, before we get too far, so you can give the readers who haven't read it a taste of the book?
Sure. So I'll read just a couple paragraphs from Amadeo's point of view, and then a little bit from Angel's point of view, just so that you can get a sense of 2 of the main characters. And this first one, in Amadeo's point of view, takes place at Easter dinner, and the family has gathered at his mother's house. And he has just participated in this Good Friday ritual, which is an old tradition in northern New Mexico. He has taken it further than most people and asked to be actually crucified, nailed to the cross. And his daughter is furious with him. Amadeo's sister apparently doesn't notice that he isn't speaking to her and hasn't since her obnoxious gift last Christmas. When Valerie comes in, she hugs him before he can dodge. Still gripping his arm, she steps back and takes Amadeo in. He almost can't look at her. The absurdly long hair hanging loose, the oversized earrings, the ambiguously ethnic scarf, and that superior, forbearing expression, as if she's willing to humor him, but only up to a point. Good to see you, little brother. Amadeo nods coolly, but she misses it because she's already turned to Angel. Oh my God, Angelica, let me see you. You're enormous. Angel ducks her head, pleased and a little shy. Hey, Aunt Val. Valerie hugs her, then crosses the living room to switch off the television. 2 years ago, Valerie got rid of her TV. If she's not making a big show of ignorance whenever someone mentions The Bachelor or a piece of celebrity gossip, then she's going on about some project one of the girls has done with the endless stores of time and intellect and creativity endemic to television-free households. I don't know how you guys can hear yourselves think with that thing going all the time, she says, dusting off her hands. So that's Amadeo and what he thinks of his sister. And this brief section is in Angel's point of view. She's just turned 16 and she's very, very pregnant. And this takes place at Smart Starts, which is the teen parent program she attends. Angel pinches the underside of her chin as she thinks. It's journaling time, and Brianna has told them to make a list of things they each need to make their own and their babies' lives better. The first few are easy. 1, GED or high school diploma and college degree. 2, a support system. 3, a car. 4, a driver's license. 5, a job. Here, Angel is stumped. If she got a job, who would take care of the baby? So she adds 6, free babysitter, a good one. But there is no such thing, not really, not unless your mom or grandma doesn't work. Even Angel knows that. Briefly, she considers her father, then dismisses the thought. Christy and Trinity are whispering. They are best friends and knew each other from before Smart Starts. We got pregnant like the same month, they're always telling people, which is either a crazy fluke or an organizational feat. Both possibilities depress Angel. Who'd like to share, asks Brianna. Today she wears her chunky sandals and a shapeless maroon sweater dress that is too heavy for outside. Jen raises her hand, tucking her silky, mousy hair behind her large white ear, preparing herself for the stage. An education. She smiles, anticipating Brianna's praise. Right, draws Lizette. Education. I forgot that one. Angel grins and tries to telegraph her approval to Lizette, but Lizette's beautiful green eyes are half closed like a lizard's. On her left hand, Jen wears a promise ring with a dinky little amethyst. It's my birthstone, she said, as if none of the rest of them were born in months with birthstones. She is going to marry her boyfriend, Jared, whom she met at church and who picks her up every afternoon when Smart Starts lets out. Angel's stomach turns whenever she thinks of her own child's father, Ryan Johnson, the way in geometry he always sat in the front row grimacing up at the board. He always raised his hand to answer questions, but was only correct about 50% of the time. It seemed crazy to Angel to keep putting yourself out there like that. But the next time Mrs. Esposito asked a question, there he was, long, skinny arms swinging in the air. Hey, he told her breathlessly, once in the hall after class. I thought of a name for you, a math name. For weeks, he called her Angle, or sometimes delighting himself still further, obtuse Angle. He was so persistent, she felt embarrassed for him, which, along with the tequila shots, explains why she slept with him. Her embarrassment also explains, perhaps, why she hasn't told him the baby is his.
Thank you. Those are great sections because they really give us a sense of who these people are. But I'm still fascinated about the notion of character and how we know how a character is. Like, I mean, I sometimes feel like character is like when you're sitting at home and you suddenly want to talk to a friend on the phone and you don't need to hear anything in particular from that friend, but you have a feeling to call them. I think it's because you have a sense of them, this sort of difficult to describe textural thing. And when you talk to them, that comes out. And I think when a character is on the page and we're in one of these particular character sections, I felt right, like there's a change in the room temperature. Do you know what I mean? And can you talk to that? Because this book is in multiple points of view.
I love that about that really describes so well sometimes what I'm longing for when I want to talk to a particular friend. It's not that I need to hear anything.
No, it's weird, right? I know.
it's just to be in that company. Yeah, I do think it is sort of a tricky thing to pin down. And I think, sometimes when writers talk about how the characters emerge and present themselves to us, it can sound very goofy. But I really do think of my characters as real people who I want to get to know. And I get to know them by seeing them, how they behave. And I mean, something I talk to my students about is how when our characters are in control, and then they get to present the selves that they want the world to see. And but when things are difficult, when you're on a cross country car trip with like a new love maybe, and the gas tank is empty and everybody's exhausted and and hungry, that's when character really starts to emerge, and because the characters are no longer as in control of themselves, and things that they might want to keep under wraps start to slip out. Um, and so I sort of see, but part of my job as a writer is to just put them in these situations where they're not in control over what they reveal.
So when you started the novel, or even more than that, the story, what did you know? And do you want to also, I mean, I always thread this very fine needle when I'm doing a book event with somebody, because I don't want to give too much away for the book for people who will read it. And I really hope everyone here will. But I also don't want to bore the people who have read it. Do you want to give a little bit of a description of the trajectory of the book before we go any further? That sort of walks that fine line, that fine needle. Oh, mixed metaphors, fine line and fine needle. That's what they pay me the medium bucks for.
Sure. I mean, I never mind a spoiler alert, because half the time when I hear, I forget.
Okay, but it's your book. Go right ahead.
But so the story starts with Amadeo, who is unemployed. He's an alcoholic. He lives with his mother. He has not been a present father for his daughter. And he really wants to change his life. And he is a member of this organization of penitentes. There is a lay Catholic organization, and in a small community, a fictional community called Las Penas in northern New Mexico. And um, he's been given the role of Jesus, and it's the star role, and he's gotten in his head that if he does the very best, most realistic performance possible, then he'll leave his old life behind. And he's thrown himself into it. And then his pregnant daughter shows up unannounced and says that she's gotten in a fight with her mother and she's moving in. And he's really thrown. It disrupts all of his plans. He resents her for showing up. And she moves in. And so the story ends with him asking for real nails to be crucified. And as he's on the cross, he looks down and he sees his daughter, sees her need, and understands that real transformation won't come from this one gesture, but from his responsibility toward his daughter. And I think one of the questions that drove me to extend the story was that epiphany enough? So often stories end with this epiphany, this moment of realization, and I just wasn't convinced that that was enough for Amadeo, or for a lot of people. I mean, I think in my own life of the times when I realize I have to change my life, and but actually changing it takes time. So the novel follows a year in this family's life, the first year of the angel's baby's life, and they face a lot of difficulties. Yolanda, Amadeo's mother and matriarch of the family, finds out early on that she is dying, and so the family has a lot a lot to deal with over the course of this first year.
How much was it important that the people transform over the course of the novel? Was that something you thought it is my job to do, or was that a natural evolution of them?
Well, I think I'm really interested in change, in character change. So it was clear to me that things would change. I didn't know exactly how they would change, and some of the changes did. I mean, a lot of the changes surprised me. I I wanted Angel and Amadeo to come to some kind of reconciliation. I knew that that was on the horizon, and that's what I was writing toward. But a lot of the nuances of it were a surprise to me.
Do you think you need to be in a certain state to write freely and let characters be characters? I mean, there's that remark about Freud, by Freud, about psychoanalysis, that you need to be in a state of evenly hovering attention when listening to a patient. Is there a similar thing for you, like listening to the direction of the characters by being free in some way?
I think so, and I'm not always in that state. So some days I'm just plugging along and waiting to then get in that state. But when the writing is going well, I mean, that's what I love about writing. That's what drew me to writing in the beginning, was the complete loss of my own self, where I just was the characters and I was in that story, and that feeling of immersion was so incredible to me. And I, that's why I write. And so that's what I'm hoping for each day.
So then as you're working, when does a plan emerge when did the plan emerge for the novel, or did you just go by feel, as they say?
I want to know this about your novels.
Hey, that's not fair.
I'll tell if you do.
Yeah.
I am not a writer who outlines and knows much. I can't. I find that a couple times, I think maybe one or two stories, I've known exactly what the arc was going to be, and I sat down and I wrote them out. And this was in graduate school, and they looked like stories. There was, they had a beginning and middle and end, and there was some decent writing, but there was something missing. And I think a lot of it was just my own curiosity, because I knew where it was going to go. And I think, especially for a long project like this, I need to not know. I need to be writing toward that mystery, and that's what keeps me engaged. But that said, I did know, once I decided that, okay, I'm going to extend this story, see where it goes. I did decide that it would be 1 year. It would be from Good Friday to Good Friday, roughly. And that constraint was really helpful to me.
Yeah.
How much do you know?
Well, I did. I just want to say first, I did an event actually at the library back in the in-person days with my friend Elizabeth Strout, and it was about character. And she said, and I could be getting this wrong, so don't quote me on this, but when she started Olive Kitteridge, I think she saw a large woman standing by a picnic table, and that was the way in. That was all she had of that character. So she was in that state where she didn't know too much. Mm-hmm. I feel like the man or woman who knows too much writing fiction may end up wanting to go back and change it, because there's an assumption maybe that you know something. But since so much fiction, as you just described, comes out of curiosity, being in that open and curious state seems to me a powerful one, and you wouldn't really want to miss that. So to go to your question, I don't outline either in the beginning. How could I always say, how could I outline when I don't even know these people yet? How can I give them directions to do this, do that? I don't know if you like this or that, or if you would do this or that. I have something that I've jokingly called the 80-page plan, where I basically feel that the first, big chunk of a novel for me is about play, is about curiosity and play and mistakes. And then when I get enough that I can feel kind of good about, I'll print it out and sit somewhere, put it in a different font, even make it look better, and then start to go through it, and then start to reckon with not the book that I wanted to write, but the book I did write. So I feel that, like, what you're describing about when you came up with that structural thing, that's an imposition that you gave it, but after you really had lived with these people for a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that constraint was really important for me because I knew almost nothing else about them. I mean, particularly, I knew Amadeo because I'd been in his point of view for the story, or I thought I knew him. Um, but the story takes place over like 4 days, so I didn't know him that well, and I only saw Angel through his eyes. So it wasn't until I was in her point of view that she sprang off the page. Um, but yeah, it does mean though that I took a lot of wrong paths. I mean, at various points, I had all kinds of other subplots and
Do you have a blooper reel?
oh God, hundreds of pages.
Really? So
Yeah.
what's that like? Do you, when that happens, do you beat up on yourself when you make a mistake, or are you pretty generous to yourself about it and just say that's part of being a writer, which of course it is?
Yeah, I mean, in my calmer, most reasonable moments, I know that I actually had to write, all those pages where Amadeo embezzles from his uncle's electronics store.
Right.
And, or I mean, pretty late in the game, Tio Tive, the elderly uncle, had his own point of view. And so, those pages were polished. He had a full arc. I am really lucky that to have good readers who told me, that there was some totally fine writing in it and it was reasonably interesting, but it wasn't necessary to the story and it was slowing things down.
What about empathy and these characters? Because I felt that this was, I mean, the thing about these characters, and I just do want to say this to all our viewers tonight, I couldn't get enough of them. I would like to read those outtakes because I really felt unusually how vivid they were. And I could just stay in their different points of view, and they did have a kind of textural distinction. The writing is different, the kinds of things that you sort of single out, but they often are walking into walls in a way in their lives. I mean, for Angel to be starting out as a mother so young in life with no money, for her father to have screwed up in these ways. And I, right before this started, I said in the fake backstage, there's a small plot involving a windshield repair kit that is truly brilliant. And the minute that kit appears in the book, something is going to go wrong involving it. And I was just stressed waiting for that to happen. And it did. And it happened in a brilliant way. What's the role of, where does empathy fit in all of this? Because I love them too.
Well, that makes me so happy to hear, because I care about these characters. I mean, I've lived with them for so long, and they feel like members of my family, and they're maddening in the way that some members of my family can be. I really had trouble with Amadeo in the beginning. The short story did not work. I turned in a draft for that story to my graduate school advisor, Ehud Havazelet, who knew, and it just wasn't quite working, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why it wasn't working. Ehud kept saying, "You need to go deeper. You need to go deeper," and I kept thinking, "What does that even mean? How do I go deeper?" And it it occurred to me sort of after a long time of just struggling with this draft that the problem was me. It was a problem. It was my own. I was hitting my own empathetic limits with him, and I wanted him punished. I started this story because I judged him. He was an alcoholic. He'd been violent in the past. He'd he had anger problems. He was not present for his daughter, and I wanted him to be punished. And that's the story I was trying to write. And of course, I wanted him to be I wanted him to learn and to do better. And I thought I was empathizing with him. I was in his point of view after all. Um, but it wasn't until I realized just how much I was judging him that I was able to think, oh gosh, okay. So I actually have to, you know, really, really sort of enter his mind and be him. And I resisted that. I've known people like Amadeo, and I didn't want to do that for
How
a
did you
long
stop doing it?
I think it took time, but once I realized what the problem was, that helped a lot.
Right.
Um,
That's really interesting. And what about feeling sorry for characters, which is different from empathy? Did that come into play at all? I mean, Yolanda and her plight. You know, can you speak to that?
I mean, I care about them, and I'm sorry when they struggle and they hurt, of course, because they, you know, I can't spend so much time on the page with somebody without coming to care about them. Um, so Yolanda discovers early on that she has a brain tumor and that her time is very limited, and she decides not to tell her family at first. And that decision, I've known somebody who kept a diagnosis quiet from their family for a long time, and I've always been really interested in that decision because it's so multifaceted. I mean, it's both selfless. She's trying to protect them from this painful knowledge. Um, and she also knows her children. She knows that the second she tells them, Amadeo's going to start feeling so sad, and she's going to have to take care of his feelings and Angel's feelings. And she wants to forestall that. Um, and she sort of hangs on to that knowledge like a kind of treasure in a strange way. It's something that's all hers. And so she deals with a lot of these difficult things alone for quite a bit of the book. And yeah, I do feel sorry for her, of course. I feel sad for her, but I think we have to be ruthless.
Yeah.
We don't get to protect our characters. I think that's when I don't know. I find that I have to sort of watch out for that.
Protecting characters, it seems to me now, is a danger as much as judging them, right? They're almost flip sides of what we're meant to do with them. All of this, talking about these sad and dark parts of the book, I want to also address something very, very different about the book, which is that it's really, really funny. And I wanted to, I was sort of flagging lines. People magazine was practically a necessity for any informed citizen. Just all kinds of lines that are witty, really, rather than funny, I guess I would say. Are you conscious of that? Or is that just something that comes out? It has like a social commentary throughout this book that feels very droll.
I think the humor is just part of these characters. It's part of how they see the world around them. And I mean, I think humor is a really important part of my life and my relationships and in the way that my family interacts. And I I think about some of the really, really difficult times we've had as a family, and there's always, always hilarity. I mean, even when we're grieving and, things are dark and awful, there are moments when we gather and we're in stitches. And so I think, you know, humor and sadness and joy and sadness are really bound up.
So when you finish a draft of a book, this book, did you sort of feel like, okay, like almost like a recipe, it needs more of this, it needs less of this, or in terms of its qualities, like sadness, like pathos? I mean, is that something that a writer, I think for people who are interested in how writers do it, is that something that like only when you read it back, you can see that you've been, you're doing too much of this, too little of that?
Oh, I mean, certainly. And I think a lot of what I've done too much of is just write pages. And so a lot of revision for me is cutting. And I cut many, many pages. One of the, I like to give myself sort of assignments and challenges when I start a new project. And, for one of my short stories, it was to start a story with a dream, which seemed like such a bad idea. But I read an Antonia Nelson story where she started the story with a dream and it worked.
It's a big
And
challenge.
it was amazing to me that she pulled it off. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try that. With the 5 Wounds, one of the assignments I gave myself was to write about joy. I wanted to make sure that in this very difficult year that this family has, that I am writing about joy. And another one was that I wanted to have romantic relationships, because I found that in my short story collection, there were almost none. And, so I thought that seems like a sad detail about who I am as a writer. And so maybe I should bring some romance into it.
It's sort of like you can forget that when you're writing, like and it takes somebody else to point it out. It's sort of like that greeting card. Have you ever seen it? It uses a Roy Lichtenstein picture, and it shows a woman under a shower saying, "Oh my God, I forgot to have children." I feel like sometimes it's like people will point out about your work, nobody has friends or nobody has sex or what, and like, I didn't mean that, right?
Yeah. And it always takes somebody else to point it out.
It's strange that we can't see these things about ourselves.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
At least not the first time around. So the title, The 5 Wounds, and the symbolism that is deep within this book made me go back to looking at Flannery O'Connor's Mystery and Manners. And she talks quite famously about her short story, Good Country People. And she has this quote that I pulled for tonight. So if some of you don't know the story or know the story, I highly recommend it. In it, there's a woman with a wooden leg, and a Bible salesman comes, and he steals her wooden leg. And she's asked about the symbolism of the wooden leg, and is it a symbol? And she says, in good fiction, certain of the details will tend to accumulate meaning from the action of the story itself. And when this happens, they become symbolic in the way they work. I once wrote a story called Good Country People, in which a lady PhD has her wooden leg stolen by a Bible salesman whom she's tried to seduce. Now, I'll admit that, paraphrased in this way, the situation is simply a low joke. The average reader is pleased to observe anybody's wooden leg being stolen. But without ceasing to appeal to him and without making any statements of high intention, the story does manage to operate at another level of experience by letting the wooden leg accumulate meaning. And she says, if you want to say that the wooden leg is a symbol, you can say that, but it is a wooden leg first. And as a wooden leg, it is absolutely necessary to the story. It has its place on the literal level of the story, but it operates in depth as well as on the surface. It increases the story in every direction. And this is essentially the way a story escapes being short. How did symbolism work with you in this book?
I love that that passage and the way she talks about symbol, and also I just love that story, and I love that the lady
Yeah.
PhD, as O'Connor calls her, has
I
renamed
know.
herself Hulda.
Yeah.
um, so I this book, I mean, The Five Wounds obviously has this incredibly weighty symbolism. It refers to the five wounds Christ suffered on the cross, um and it's, the first line is, "This year Amadeo Padilla is Jesus," and it engages directly with the story of Christ's death, life and death, but mostly death. And that story is something that Amadeo, throughout the novel, is reading himself into, and he's taking away different things, and he thinks of himself as Jesus, and then he sort of rails against Jesus, who didn't have it so bad, because actually he knew he was the son of God and going to get swept up to heaven. And so I was it's tricky because the symbolism is right there. I mean, it's not even symbolism. It's like, there is the
You're
story.
enacting symbolism. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Angel shows up pregnant, and so there's the sort of the birth of Jesus story sort of being enacted. And I was playing with that. Like, that was sort of, it was fun for me to be playing with, and absurd also, that this guy is playing the role of Jesus and thinking of himself as Jesus. I thought that was funny, as well as being painful, because he needs it. But as it was tricky, because I didn't want that story, this old story that is the basis of one of the world's major religions, and has been um, represented in a zillion different ways in art and literature. And um, I didn't want that to take over, and it could well take over. And so it was, in short, I mean, it was really, really important to me that story be one aspect of Amadeo's story, and something that he's actively grappling with. But I do resist, my characters becoming symbolic in any way,
Right.
or because they're people, they're complicated people. But I am really interested in how we can hear the same story, and at different points in our lives, or different mindsets, we can identify with different parts of that story. At one point, Amadeo, when he's waiting for Angel to give birth, it's Mary who he thinks about, who had to watch her son suffer because he's watching his daughter suffer.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about writing more generally, because I always think it's sort of hard to separate out how you wrote this book and how you think about writing. And in particular, I wanted to ask about your shift from story to novel, because I was thinking about a writer like Alice Munro, whose stories can feel like little novels.
Yeah.
It's like where a normal story would end, she keeps going. And I find that so often so bold. And I wonder, like, do you have a sort of unified theory about writing, about what writing should do? Like, what do you want from fiction? Like, when you read fiction, is there something you look for?
Yeah, I mean, well, on a very basic level, and it feels sort of embarrassing to say it, but I want to be entertained. I want to care about the characters, and I want to believe them, and I want to be curious about them. and I want to be in their company. I would say that's the main thing I'm looking for. I'm curious about the experience that the writer is creating for me. And that's, I'm interested in that. But yeah, I want to care about the characters that I read about.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? Is the recipe for that? Maybe it is go deep, like you were told, right? Just go. If you go deeper, you're going to find something, and it may not be what you expected, right?
Well, that's what I love about Alice Munro's stories, is that she, not only does she keep us on the page longer than we think we should be, or that another writer might keep us, but she also just peels away layers and goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And so every time a character has a reaction, she interrogates that. She makes us sit with that and question that, and then she peels away a layer, and actually there's another reaction under that one. And then she just keeps peeling and peeling and peeling. And then when you think you've gotten to as deep as you can possibly be, and as much as you can possibly know about this character, then there's this other inversion. And that's what keeps her work so thrilling, I think, is that there's so much to be discovered in her work.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've reached the moment where we can get some questions from our audience. So here's one. Oh, that's right. We were told how to do this, and I'm doing it wrong already.
You're not in any way doing it wrong. Feel free to go with that.
You can do it. No, I want you to do it.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for a really fantastic and rich and inspiring discussion so far. So audience members, do please add your questions in the chat. We've got a juicy one here. Kirstin, I love your short story Jubilee. Will Andrea be coming back in a novel anytime soon? She's such a charmingly hard to like character. That's great.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that, because I think I think sometimes readers don't like Andrea, and I love her. She's so prickly. I don't think I will return to Andrea, at least not anytime soon. I think, by the end of that story, a lot of my questions about her were answered. I do sort of think of her, though, as still being in that blueberry patch, picking blueberries and having a sort of moment of peace that she's tried so hard not to let herself have. Thank you for that kind word about that story.
That brings the question to mind about likability. Is that something you worry about, or anybody asks you about when you're writing? Is that something you think about?
I think about it all the time, because as a person, I so want to be liked by people, but I don't. I mean, often what I hear is that my characters are hard to like, or frustrating, or that the stories are dark, and I'm always a little bit surprised by that, because I like them, and a character, I like a flawed character, as long as the character wants something, and it doesn't even have to be something that I value or think they should want, but as long as they are trying for something, then I'm pretty much on their side. And Amadeo is hard to like. He's a difficult guy, and but he wants to change his life, and he wants to be a better father, and so I like him for that.
Yeah, even if it doesn't happen, even if lives can't be changed, the struggle, I think witnessing the struggle is what we do when we read fiction, right? We're privy to that struggle among people who don't exist and therefore will never meet.
Yeah, I think of there's a passage in Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory, and I'll probably botch it, but the whiskey priest has been thrown in jail, and it's this filthy, crowded space, and he's looking around, and it's really a sort of yucky mash of humanity and criminality in the jail, and he reflects, when you visualize a man or woman carefully, when you and something about when you really look at the contours of their face, and he does it better. And my apologies to Graham Greene. But he says it was always impossible not to feel pity. And that was the image, that was the quality God's image carried with it. And I don't think pity is quite I think he's talking about empathy there, but I love that if you just sit with somebody and look carefully at them, then you can't help but feel for them. And I do think of that as my job as a writer.
Yes, right. So that's getting to the essential sort of project of the novel. Once you started showing these people's lives, you sort of got to a point where it was really, I don't know, there's the interplay between them, right, is sort of taking place. It's almost like a big square dance in a sense, and you're kind of watching it, and you're sort of seeing it happen. And your job, as you say, is as you describe. I feel like the way novels get formed. I have a friend who's a novelist, and when she wrote her first book, she said she was going to write a page a day, and then at the end of the year, she had a novel. And it was so strange the way the building blocks of that, but she was just watching these characters kind of form, and it kind of weirdly happened.
I know a writer who writes like that too, and I'm always amazed by it.
Maybe it's the same writer. Kathleen Shine said that about her first novel. I don't think she writes that way now. That's not the same one, is it?
No, it's David Vann who said that.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
David Vann. Oh, yes. I guess we have another question that I'll let Sarah Holiday ask.
So someone asks, how much research did you have to do for the novel? And I might toss this one to you as well, Meg. Stories about researching for fiction writing?
Oh, okay. I don't like research, and I think I'm very poor at it. I remember being in grade school and having to write outlines of whatever it was, like the ancient Greeks, and I didn't even get it. I would write like A, what they wore, 2, what they ate. Like I just could not organize my thoughts in that way. I guess I feel like writers are generalists. Fiction writers tend to be generalists. We know a lot of things, little things that somehow get plugged in at the moment, or we remember something. Then I'll go and learn something more about it. But I've been asked that, like the one somewhat historical novel I wrote, The Wife, some of it takes place in the 1950s, Smith College in the 1950s. And I read Sylvia Plath's journals and letters home backwards and forwards when I was young. And it wasn't like, when I was young, I thought, one day I'll use this, But when I was developing that world, I wanted to go back and read those journals again to make sure that I had that world right. But I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy that. And I'm always amazed by friends who write, big historical novels where they do the research first. How can you wait? Like, I want the dessert, which is writing. I would want that right away. How about you, Kirstin?
I also research on a sort of as needed basis. So in The Five Wounds, when Amadeo starts his windshield repair business, I have a relative who bought one of those kits, but I didn't know anything about the kit or his experience using it. So I did have to do research on that, like how do you repair a bullseye? And I did some research on the penitentes, because I certainly read about that, because it was important to me that I get this practice right, and that I sort of honor that really old practice. But it's a contemporary novel in a place I know pretty well. I had a phone book from Espanola near my desk in case I needed to look things up, but yeah, I think a historical novel is very different. I mean, I wrote a story from the point of view of a 12th century saint, and I had to look up everything. I didn't know like what the thing near the wimple was called, and would a window in a regular house have glass? I mean, all kinds of things I didn't know.
Yeah, because that would create a very different flow. It's like a stop and start flow, right? If you're doing it. I know.
It was maddening.
Yeah.
I was so happy when those things got sort of set up and I could just be in the world.
But then there's also the kind of Wikipedia novel that we sometimes, I mean, the way that Wikipedia has sort of, or Google has affected writing novels, that you suddenly might, in the middle of writing, have a long block of text about how to do something, and that you wouldn't have had prior to the internet because you wouldn't have known. And now that you have it, why not flaunt it? But it sometimes it stands out, and not in a good way. I don't mean in your book, that one has done that, right? And I'll find myself, oh no, then I'll pare it back later. But that really speaks to the notion that revision is everything, right?
Oh man, yeah. Everything.
Isn't it? It's like the magic eye pictures. You're writing stuff and you go, oh, this is so great. And then it's only when you're revising that you see the elephant, right? That the thing pops out and you see, how could I almost let this get published. How did I not see it?
I know, and it's mortifying, the things that I do let slip, but the things that I almost let out there. Yeah, I love revision though. That's my favorite part, because I feel like when I'm drafting, I'm sort of having to create the clay, and it's not always easy to create something out of nothing. And then once I've got the clay, then playing around with it is really fun.
Yes.
Well, one of my friends here has put in the chat, thank you for this brilliant discussion, which I absolutely second. I think we're kind of moving toward a close, but I'm going to throw in sort of a double question here. She asks, do you have a favorite childhood book, either or both authors present? I was also going to toss in, is there something that you've read recently or that's relatively new, either one, that you'd love for the audience to read, in addition to The Five Wounds and The Female Persuasion?
Now I'm like panicking. Now I'm panicking in that way, and I have to. Oh yeah, like, do you get that way? Like as if you've read nothing in your life?
Yeah, always. My mind is wiped clean.
I did recently read Real Life by Brandon Taylor, which I really recommend.
Okay.
And who also has a collection of stories, so he writes stories as well. And I read your book, but that doesn't count. So. And for childhood, and then I'll turn it over to you for childhood, Charlotte's Web was a really an important book. I read it on my mother's lap, and the notion of crying over the death of a spider. Sorry if those of you who didn't know that happens at the end. I'm sorry. Deal with it. It's about empathy. It's about understanding, and I just loved it so much, and I was moved by it. And then I craved being moved by a book, I think. Like, I got my taste for that in that book. How about you?
God, I loved that book. There were so many, I've read so much as a child, and I just, I loved the Anne of Green Gables series. That kept me very busy. I loved, I had a book of the lives of the saints, and I loved those too. They were so gory and bizarre. and these people who, gave their lives for something they believed in felt so foreign to me. So those were good books. I read Natasha Trethewey's Memorial Drive, her memoir, and my God, that's a gorgeous book. It's a really, really beautiful, painful book. And then I also read Emma Duffy Comparone's new collection called Love Like That. And those stories they're dark and hilarious and heartbreaking, and They're really, really wonderful.
Oh, I also read, this could go on, but Tove Jansson's The Summer Book.
I love that book.
Do you? Okay. That's like maybe my favorite book that I've read in a really long time, other than yours. I just love that book. We'll talk.
Isn't it amazing? Oh man, I read that twice during the pandemic.
Really? I needed to read it during the pandemic.
I went back. Yeah, I went back to it. It was
like
one of the
sorbet. And she, by the way, for our viewers, wrote the Moomin Troll books. Is a Finnish writer, children's writer, famous. And there's a film about her actually out now. I'll send you a link about this. Not a documentary, a feature film about her. Anyway, the New York Review of Books classic series reissued this book, and it's extraordinary.
It's so beautiful and so unsentimental, but oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah,
that's some great recommendation. I'm making notes. I'm sure we all are. That's great. Good. So I think we'll move towards wrapping up. Is there anything?
Mary Stewart was asking me to say the name again. The Summer Book. Tove Jansson, Jansson.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Got it right.
So is there anything that hasn't been said yet that you'd like to throw in? And I want to add, what a wonderful, rich discussion. Many delightful things.
I do want to just say, Meg, that one of the scenes in my book was modeled off after one of yours in The Interestings, when Jules has grown up and she's gone to this conference, and she runs into the therapist of this old friend of hers from her youth who raped another friend of hers, and the therapist has dementia, and he says something. He says, "Isn't it terrible about how he killed her?" And he gets the story wrong, but gets it so right. And that scene was so breathtaking. I just loved it. And I tried to do a similar thing, and it was not at all similar, but I just love that.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Kirstin Valdez Quade and Meg Wolitzer. Thank you, audience members. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Meg.
Oh, thanks for having us. Bye-bye.